Welcome to the TFD Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Sullivan, and this is the show where we break down popular science into easily digestible and actionable information to give you the blueprint to be a high performer in your life. Today, our guest is Nina Gelbke, or as you may know her from her insanely informative social media account, Naturally Nina. Nina is an accredited nutritionist and sports nutritionist and CrossFit athlete who specializes in sports and performance nutrition, disordered eating, and plant-based diet. Nina is known far and wide for her wholesome and delicious recipes that she routinely shares with her fan base. But today, I want to chat to Nina about type 1 diabetes, a condition that she thrives with. See, she not only has a serious passion for developing great nourishing recipes, but she is also deeply passionate about helping educate people about how to live and thrive with type 1 diabetes. We're going to deep dive into what type 1 diabetes is, whether or not insulin is good or bad in the body, how to manage your insulin as a diabetic, and we also discuss the roles of carbohydrate for exercise and why you shouldn't pay much attention to low-carb diets as an athlete. And we finish off with Nina's philosophy about how to best navigate the nutrition space to find the best diet that works for you. This is an absolute banger, so let's get to it. All right, we are back for another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. So we have another great guest joining us today. I'm going to absolutely butcher this last name, but we have Nina Gelbke. I'm going to try and say it probably Gelbke. Is that right, Nina?
No, that's great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Now, we were just chatting there. So that's a Swiss last name. How do you actually say that properly?
Well, so in Switzerland, we say Gelbke.
Yeah, there's no chance I'm getting that. Absolutely no chance. Nina, thanks so much for coming on. Let's get straight to it. There's so much I want to talk to you about. I was running late today, so we've already cut into our time. So apologies on my end. Thank you for waiting. So I think let's just get straight into this. Nina, I'm sure everyone who knows you, Naturally Nina, I'm sure a lot of people know your Instagram. You've got a really, really big fan base, really big following. You put up so much cool recipes. And what I do with my job when I go traveling with my athletes, I always start cooking for my guys. But I will never, ever say to anyone that I'm a good cook. And I don't profess to be, but I think I'm pretty good at like making things look pretty good. And of course you can get the nutrition right. But every time you put up something, I always just think, oh my God, that looks amazing. Like, is that something you've learnt? Or have you always been like a chef in the making? Did you start cooking when you were younger, or was it something that like came later in life, or how did it come about?
Well, thank you, first of all. It's like definitely a little passion project of mine is just making food look nice and posting pictures, but it definitely I think it tastes good. And from what I hear other people tasting it, it tastes good as well. So I'm happy about that. But yeah, I'd say from like a young age, we've always been in the kitchen with mum, like me and my sister, like helping her cook and like learning how to make stuff. And we've always been quite a food orientated family in a way that we've always like eaten meals together and cooked together and done things like that. And something my mum really enjoys. I've always thought she was a really good cook. So I think that kind of just like gets passed along when it's there always growing up. I remember like in primary school, my friends would always be jealous of my lunchbox because they'd have like, Vegemite sandwiches and we'd have like dinner leftovers, which would be like risotto and tofu burgers and things like that. So no, it was good. And then, yeah, I just kind of developed a bit more of a passion as I got into it. And I really love making things pretty as well and then taking photos of it. I'm not like one of those fancy food bloggers with like a whole studio and stuff. I legit just put the food on my kitchen bench top, take a photo, and then that's it.
And that's that. Maybe that's why I'm not the greatest cook, because I love my mother so dearly. But she is not a great cook. And I'll say it, I vividly remember this when I was growing up. There was never really a time I went, oh my God, that's an amazing dish, because bless her soul, I love her to pieces. But yeah, she can't cook. Maybe that's why I'm no good.
Yeah, I definitely think it's got something to do with how you grow up for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Nina, let's get into it as well. You're into CrossFit. Is CrossFit your main sport? Is that what you mostly do these days?
Well, it is since this week, yes. For the past 2 years, I've been really focusing on Olympic weightlifting. So I didn't really do much CrossFit and was basically just doing weightlifting programming like 4 or 5 days a week. But after this CrossFit Open, because I coach CrossFit as well, so like I spend a lot of time in the CrossFit gym and like interacting with all my gym members and stuff. And I've just really realized I think I want to get back into CrossFit because I just love feeling fit and being able to do all that cool stuff, and just Olympic weightlifting, whilst I love it, it is very repetitive. So like you're doing the same thing every session, and you don't get like, you get your heart rate up, but it's never the same as in CrossFit. So I've just decided this past week, okay, I'm going to go back to CrossFit for a while and have a crack at that. So from this week it is, yep.
What got you into CrossFit? Because most people that I talk to, I've never really met someone that was like, oh yeah, I started CrossFit when I was really young. I don't think I've ever met someone that has said that to me. They've always done like other sports. Maybe it's just because it's newer, right? Maybe it's because it's a newer sport. But what did you do and then get into CrossFit? What led you to that?
So when I was in high school, I was a competitive swimmer. So I did quite a lot of swim training, usually like 2 to 4 hours a day. And that was like my ultimate passion. Then during high school, I also suffered from an eating disorder. So when I was hospitalized for a long time and had to take a break, like I had to completely stop sport for a few years for my recovery. And then when I was kind of given the medical clearance to get back into sport, I was already out of high school, and where I live, like it's a pretty small town. So we didn't actually have a swim club that was, you know, for people older than school age. So I didn't actually have I wanted to go back to swimming, but there just wasn't really the opportunity, unless I just wanted to go swim laps by myself in the pool, which didn't really appeal to me. So some people that I knew in the community had opened up a sort of a CrossFit style gym, and I went along there, had a crack at the classes, and I just thought it was the best thing ever. So that's kind of history.
Just caught the bug, hey?
Yeah.
So you obviously had quite an interesting journey leading up, obviously, with your nutrition and battling that eating disorder and then overcoming it. And then you're obviously very athletic as you're growing up. How did all of that shape and influence your journey into becoming naturally Nina?
So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 9 years old. And I think that's kind of what really sparked my sort of passion for health and food and nutrition and fitness, because it just kind of taught me how much of an impact what you eat has on how you feel and how your body functions. And I had to pay a lot of attention to what I was eating, from like carb counting and just knowing how different foods affect my blood sugar levels and all of that, which of course being a perfectionist, I took to the extreme. And yeah, that led me down a very unhealthy path, but like kind of relearning how to actually, you know, eat well for your body, but also your mind, and have a healthy relationship with food and all of that, plus also fueling your sporting performance. That just kind of all intertwined to kind of get me to where I am today, and led me to studying nutrition, which I absolutely loved, and then going down that road with my career as well.
Yeah, I've noticed that with a lot of your work, you really do have the whole holistic approach. Do you feel like because you had to juggle so many different things, and you're obviously training like a mad person, if you're doing, you know, a few hours of training for swimming every day, type 1 diabetes, is that why you've got such a holistic approach?
Yeah, I would say so, because I definitely, you know, was in the sort of headspace some years ago where like health and nutrition, like the facts was all that mattered. And I was like, well, it just matters that it's the healthiest. Everything else doesn't matter. And I kind of realized, well, that's actually not the case. There's this whole like, you know, are you able to eat socially with friends? Are you able to enjoy food? And are you able to have like a balance outside of food, outside of training? And I think that just really taught me the importance of everything, not just the facts of what's on your plate.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things I want to go over, but I think firstly, I want to touch on type 1 diabetes, because I think this is an area of nutrition, particularly sports nutrition, or even practitioners. We're not as informed about it as well. We have athletes that come to us, and to be honest, I always have to refer them on, because it can be quite a complex issue and it's a complex puzzle to try and solve. Like you said, there's a lot of things going on, carb counting, and then you're adding on top of that all of the training, all of the recovery. I want to go and deep dive into this, but just straight off the bat, can you just talk to us straight? What is type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, so type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. So autoimmune basically means like we don't really know what the cause is other than your own immune system starts attacking certain cells in your body. And in type 1 diabetes case, it's your own immune system attacks the beta cells of the pancreas. So the beta cells of the pancreas produce the hormone insulin, and insulin is what allows our body to use the carbohydrates in our food to fuel our muscles for energy. So if we don't have insulin in our bodies, that glucose that from the food that we eat just stays in our bloodstream, makes our blood sugars go high, whilst our muscles and tissues aren't getting that glucose and the energy that they need to live and function. So insulin, I know like it gets thrown around a lot, demonized a lot, especially on social media as like, this fat storage hormone or whatever, but it's actually a life essential hormone for us to metabolize the food that we eat into energy. And someone with type 1 diabetes who doesn't make insulin has to inject or have an insulin pump where they're getting that insulin 24 hours a day, every day. And the amount of insulin that you need depends on a whole heap of factors, including not just the carbohydrates in the food that you eat, but also like the type of carbs and the rest of the composition of that meal, and definitely exercise and activity levels, but also other things like stress and hormones and body fat percentage and like the weather. Like honestly, there's just so many things that come into play it's not like a regular medication that you can just have this dose and you take that dose every day. It's something that every single day you kind of have to do all these maths and juggling in your head to figure out exactly how much you need. And it's always a guessing game. So sometimes that might be a bit too much and you'll have hypos. Sometimes it's not quite enough and your blood sugar goes high. And constantly monitoring and trying to maintain your blood sugar levels in that healthy range is a really important part of living with type 1 diabetes, because it definitely does affect you on both a mental and a physical level when your blood sugars are out of range, especially when it comes to training. So both high and low blood sugars have like consequences like making you feel irritable, low in energy, headaches, dizziness, fatigue. So it really is a full-time job.
Yeah, I bet. What was it like for you, Nina, when you first got diagnosed with it? What was that process like? And what was the treatment and the protocols and the conversations you were having with your care team once you got diagnosed?
Yeah, look, it was a long time ago. I was 9, so it's like 16 years ago. But I think I took it on board really well at that age. It was kind of like, okay, this is my reality now, whatever. And yeah, I spent a week in hospital kind of learning how to carb count, learning how to give my insulin. It was a little bit different at the time because it was more, okay, this is how much insulin you're taking. And at the time it was injections. So now you don't really have anyone on injections anymore. It's all insulin pens. So that's still an injection, but it's not like with syringes or insulin pump, which is what I'm currently doing. But yeah, at the time it was like you have to draw up your insulin in a syringe and you just give these amounts in the morning and in the evening. And you have to make sure each of your meals has this amount of carbs and you basically can't stray from that. And that was just kind of what we started doing. And being, 9 years old, mum definitely helped me a lot with that. And we just check blood sugar levels, give the insulin. I think it was only later on that I started becoming very like, I have to have perfect blood sugar levels all the time, kind of spiraled down that route. And at the start, I was just like, this is just my blood sugar level. This is just a piece of information and that's it, which was probably actually a better mindset. But I've been working on that the past few years again to kind of let go about that perfectionism around my blood sugar levels, because you just can't get it perfect all the time, no matter how much you try.
So is that a pretty unattainable goal? Is that fair to say if you are just constantly searching for that perfection, trying to dose your insulin perfectly with the food that you're eating? Is it pretty well known once you've gone through it that, okay, we're not going to get it right every single time?
Yeah, 100%, because I think there's about 42 different factors that affect your blood sugar levels. And a lot of those factors are out of your control. So it's not just the insulin you give and the food you eat. It's also, things out of your control, like your stress and your sleep and your hormones. You could be sick. Even like with insulin pumps, you could have a kinked cannula. So you could not be getting insulin from that reason. Or, sometimes when you have insulin going into your body in that cannula for like a few days, you get like a bit of buildup of fat tissue around that. So the absorption isn't as good and you don't get quite the same amount from that insulin, or, just day-to-day changes. You can honestly sometimes do exactly the same thing that you always do, and you always, get this sort of predictable outcome. And then one day you just get a totally different outcome, and there's absolutely no reason to explain it, but that's just diabetes.
What are some of the complications? Say if you're not getting this right, or you're not getting your numbers, or you're struggling to hit it, and we acknowledge that you don't have to get it exactly right every time, but what if you're quite a bit off every day? What are the complications that happen?
Yeah, so if there's the short-term and long-term complications. So the short-term complications are more around low blood sugars, so hypos. So if your blood sugar goes low, which usually is a factor of, exercising more, or eating less, or giving too much insulin for what you've eaten or the exercise that you're doing. So if your blood sugar goes low, then you feel really dizzy, brain fog, kind of like when you're drunk, like you can't really put sentences together, zero energy. Like when you're training, it's the worst because you just like everything feels a million kilos and you're just completely out of it. And then if it gets too low, there's definitely the risk of having a seizure, going into a coma, and that stuff that we don't even want to think about. And then if your blood sugar is high, it also makes you feel a bit crappy immediately. So you're really thirsty, you might have a headache, bit of blurred vision, bit of irritability, but high blood sugars aren't really a threat in the short term. It's only prolonged. So thinking about months to years of high blood sugar levels, when you can then increase your risk of developing certain complications, which might be like neuropathy or retinopathy, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, and basically the microvascular complications would be, and that's because there's too much glucose in your blood, which damages those really tiny blood vessels.
Okay, so there is quite a lot to it. Nina, could you talk us through, let's just say a standard day for an everyday person? Let's just say they're not training, because we'll get to the training and add that layer of complexity to it. But just to say for the everyday person, from when they wake up to when they go to bed, what would a typical dosing strategy look like for the day?
All right. So I'm on an insulin pump. So my insulin pump gives me a basal amount of insulin. So that's essentially just a small, tiny drip of insulin that is infused into me throughout the whole day. So 24 hours a day. And for me, that's usually, 0.3 units of insulin. So these are tiny amounts, like per hour, that will just be infused into me constantly. And this is something that you have to like fine tune and adjust over time. And it can also change over time. And it's usually you figure it out with your diabetes team, because it's pretty complex to kind of figure out exactly how much you need as that basal dose. And then for each meal, you give a bolus. So to do that, you have to essentially calculate the carbohydrates in the meal that you want to eat. But you also have to consider other things like the type of carbohydrate. So is it like a complex carb that's more going to be slow absorbed, or is it more like a simple carb that's going to be absorbed pretty quickly? Then you also have to consider the fiber in that meal, because that delays carbohydrate absorption, as well as the fat, which also delays carb absorption, and the protein, which both delays carb absorption and can also actually cause a rise in blood sugar levels as well, as I'm sure you're aware of. So with all these factors, plus you also have to consider your activity level. So are you going to be exercising after that meal, or have you just exercised before that meal? And then you have to consider your insulin sensitivity. So insulin sensitivity essentially dictates how much insulin you have to take per like carbohydrate. So that is influenced by things like time of day, activity levels, and just other various personal factors. Now, I think this is how my mind is constantly like thinking of a million things. And the other thing that you have to also consider is like the timing of the insulin. So not just how much you need to take, but also when you need to take it. So for example, I'm just going to take breakfast. If I'm having like a bowl of oats, and that might be, 70 grams of carbs or so, I will be giving myself the bolus. So my pump will calculate how much bolus insulin I need according to my insulin to carbohydrate ratio, which might be like I need 1 unit of insulin per 30 grams of carbs that I'm eating, for example. So if I put that in, plug in, I'm going to have 70 grams of carbs. My blood sugar is currently 5. put that in, and it tells me, okay, you need, I don't know, for example, 3 units of insulin for this meal. And then I will give that, I will say, okay, pump, give me this insulin. And I'll usually give that about 20 minutes to 30 minutes even before a meal. So that gives the insulin time to actually start taking action, because it's not like human insulin that we produce. It actually takes a little bit of time to take effect. And because most of the food that I eat is rather slow absorbing, so it's got some fiber in there, it's got some protein in there, it's got some fats in there, I also have to split that dose up. So it might give me, 50% of that dose straight away, 30 minutes before I eat. And then the remaining 50%, it will give me like 1.5 hours, over 1.5 hours. So kind of whilst I'm eating and whilst that food is digesting and absorbing. And yeah, like I would have to also adjust that dose if I knew I was going to go and train right after, because I know I'm going to be expending energy. I'm going to be utilizing some of those carbohydrates without the need for insulin. So I'd have to take a bit off potentially if I'm going to go train or go for a walk or something, versus like if it's a rest day, I might have to add a little bit because I know I'm not going to be as active and as insulin sensitive. I feel like that was a lot. But for me, it's like second nature now.
I was going to say it'd just be your everyday, right? And like, I think listening to it, and this is what I want to get across with it, it's so much more complex. And I think it's a good to get across because like you said earlier, insulin is so demonized, especially in today where everyone just thinks, oh, insulin is the biggest problem. But you, out of everyone, you would have such a different perspective on insulin. Like you said, it's quite literally, it saves people's lives. It's what's keeping you alive.
Yeah, absolutely. I get a little bit annoyed when people demonize insulin like that because, it's always about, oh, keep insulin levels as low as possible. And it's like, well, is it really about that? Or is it more about, the things that you're doing that potentially lead to elevated insulin levels that are the problem, not the elevated insulin itself?
Let's jump into that because I think that's an important point, right? Because I feel you'd know this better than anyone. Social media is a place where something goes on. I feel like people just want something to blame. They just want something. Like we want an easy answer when it comes to nutrition. That's why when someone says, go eat just liver and eggs or whatever, and whatever it is, like, it's like, okay, if I do that, then all these problems will go away. And I think insulin, because it's so misunderstood and people don't really get it, it's like an easy thing to just be like, oh yeah, it's insulin's fault. Oh yeah, all of this is insulin's fault. What is it? What would you say? Is it really insulin, in your opinion, that's causing, say, issues? Or is it, like you said, maybe it's these other factors with your diet and you might be eating other things that cause these rapid ups and downs? What's your thoughts on it?
People demonize insulin again because they want something to demonize, like we talked about. They want, an answer. This is the problem. It's not what I'm doing. It's, these, I don't know, and people use really sciencey, fancy words, which, make them sound like they know what they're talking about when they probably have no idea. But yeah, I definitely think from my experience, from my knowledge, that it's the things that we're doing that lead to elevated insulin levels. That is, the thing that needs to be addressed and the issue, not the elevated insulin itself. And I use the example of when I'm sitting on a plane for like 20 hours flying somewhere, which I haven't done in a very long time. But when I do, I just need way more insulin than usual for, the meals that I'm eating and just sitting there and not even eating because I'm sitting, like I'm just completely sedentary for like 20 hours. And that just makes me very insulin resistant. And like, I can see that very well as a type 1 diabetic, but people who aren't constantly measuring this probably can't tell that. But in a world where, the majority of people are very sedentary, they're probably eating diets very rich in like highly processed refined foods, high in like saturated fat and refined carbs, which contribute to insulin resistant. They're stressed all the time. They've probably got a lack of sleep, like all of these things which are contributing to insulin resistance, which then leads to your body having to create excess insulin to combat that. That's the issue, but it's not the insulin itself. That's happening as a result of the things that we're doing. And that's kind of what we need to address and not just blame insulin.
Yeah, I think, and I find that whenever you take any of these things that people blame, whether it's insulin, whether it's any other macronutrient, any other micronutrient, when you take those steps back and you go, okay, let's just figure out what's going on here. Let's see what the background noise is. you always come back to these same things. Okay, maybe it's a lifestyle factor. Maybe it's because you're not doing any of this exercise. You have a very sedentary lifestyle. Maybe it's because you've got no structure to your food, and the food that you are eating is very high in one particular macronutrient. We don't have a good spread between the food groups. It's almost like every single time we always come back to these same recommendations from a nutrition level. And I feel like the general public, they don't like that. They don't like it that we keep coming back and nowhere we go, hey, you know what? It's kind of this that we keep saying. And they just go, no, I want to blame
Too boring,
this.
Isn't it?
Too boring. That's right. But do you think, how is that all influenced, say, your philosophy and your recommendations about nutrition? Because obviously, like you're saying, you need to have all of these factors in place where, it's not necessarily insulin, it's what's influencing what the insulin does. How has that influenced your own thoughts and philosophies about, what is best practice when it comes to nutrition?
Yeah, I think like for me, it just always comes down to like looking at how you can best take care of yourself in like multiple different ways, which can be through like doing and eating the things that make you feel good, which usually also translate to better health. So, like eating a diet that's well balanced, rich in whole foods, rich in fruit and veggies, like that makes you feel good. And that's also really good for you, but doing it in a way that allows you to also like enjoy what you're doing and have a healthy relationship with food. Like, for example, learning how to make those foods taste good, learning how to make it fit into your lifestyle, finding like forms of exercise that you enjoy and you can look forward to doing and you can have fun around, and like making it something that doesn't feel like I'm constantly having to watch my diet and do this and do that, but becomes part of, who you are as a person because you enjoy doing it. And yeah, it's like a lifestyle rather than just this is a prescriptive meal plan or something like that.
Yeah, it's always funny in nutrition, hey, because yes, it's a pretty complex science, but if you want to narrow it down and boil it down and distill it, I think we've pretty much got 90%. Maybe, yeah, if we go down the epigenetic pathway, nutrigenomics, and we go through all of that, DNA, yeah, there's a lot we could probably still learn there. But if you're looking and you're thinking, hey, I just want to be my healthiest self, I think most people who are pretty well educated in physiology, biochemistry, all these other things, we all kind of have the same recommendations, right? And it's all these other things that just cloud it. Why are people so attracted to just not following these things?
Yeah. It's really strange, isn't it? And people are almost always looking for somebody who's saying something different to everyone else and think, oh, wow, I found it now. When like, if we really think about it, if everyone's saying the same thing and then there's a few, quacks on social media saying something totally different, like why are we thinking that they might have it figured out when it's against what everyone else is saying?
It must drive you insane, like we were talking about earlier, the insulin theory. When you hear, I think, is it Dr. Jason Fung? Is he the guy that does a lot of the insulin?
Yeah, and Mark Hyman is another one of those.
Yeah, they must drive you absolutely insane because you see it, right? Like you understand that it's such a complex thing, but it's not exactly insulin that's, doing the issue. It's everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And especially I find it really frustrating because in the work that I do, like I work mostly with people around like disordered eating. So like seeing that the effect, all of this stuff on social media and, especially this nutrition extremism, this like black and white demonizing foods, like, putting so much emphasis on like everything has to be perfect and this all has to be eliminated and you can't do that and you can't do that. Like the effect that this has on people, like not just their physical, but their mental health and their whole like well-being and lives, like it's really sad.
Can we touch on that, Nina? Because I know you said this before, is that when you're talking about your dosing your insulin or getting it, it's not just the food that influences that. It's not just the food that, okay, it's a straight equation, this much food, we need this much insulin, because you said there's so many other factors. And one of the other ones is stress. And stress is such a big thing, right? And I think chronic low-grade stress is one of the worst things and most common things that people don't appreciate. I always talk about it like when we think about health and well-being, it's like an elephant and there's a bunch of scientists with blindfolds on and we're all touching different sides of the elephant. We're all describing the exact same thing from our own point of view, but really it's this big holistic approach. How does it all tie in, or how much effect does, say, stress and all these other things, like if you're constantly seeing all this misinformation and that's, like you said, it's affecting your mental health. how is that going to play a role in, say, how you're managing things like your type 1 diabetes?
Well, like stress, it has such a huge impact. Like we all know how like bad stress is for us essentially, but like, on things like as a diabetic, like it makes my blood sugars harder to manage, definitely. But it also has so many other impacts, like, for example, on our digestion. Like stress has, the biggest impact on our digestion. I see, people come to me with digestive issues when you can clearly see a lot of these are just from all the stress and anxiety they have around food. And of course, the answer that people are looking for is always, okay, elimination of foods, and you can't eat this and you can't eat that, when sometimes it's actually as simple as working on creating a more healthy and relaxed relationship around food and reducing some of that stress. And like 90% of the digestive symptoms significantly improve as a result of that. It can impact our sleep, it can impact our hormones, it can impact our relationships. Like stress has such a huge effect on us. And I've been thinking about this a lot because I used to be in a place where I was like in pursuit of the perfect diet. I was always looking for like, what is the perfect way to eat for like my health, for my blood sugars or whatever. Like I wanted to get it perfect, and nothing could like go on my plate that wasn't in my eyes like perfect. And like over the years, I've found to realize that okay, like maybe there is this ideal way to eat, but if it's taking away value, like in your life in other ways, like for example, it means you can't enjoy a meal with friends, or you can't, have the occasional treat that you just really enjoy, like, I don't know, some chocolate after dinner, or going out with friends or whatever that is. If it doesn't allow you to do those things, is it really the healthiest way to eat? Or is the healthiest way to eat maybe one that is, maybe 80% of the time it is, healthy, but then the other 20% of the time it is like healthy for your mind. So it allows you to socialize. It allows you to just eat things that you really enjoy and that make you happy, and that allow you to be more relaxed, and that allow you to stress less and not feel like you're failing when you're maybe not following up those standards that you've set in your mind. So I think it really is about that balance. Like balance is such a overused word these days, but like it really is about that.
Did you find that in your own journey as you were going through, and as you were, say, recovering from that eating disorder, and you were working through all of this, and as you were improving your relationship with food, did you find it easier to manage your type 1 diabetes?
Look, I'm not going to lie. It is like a daily sort of a battle, not a battle as such, but some days are hard. Some days are better. Some days things just go wrong. I definitely think when I was in my eating disorder, it was a lot harder, just because you're not eating properly. Like my blood sugars were just low all the time. I was just low. I just could not get them up. It was crazy. Then in hospital was a terrible experience, because you're actually, due to the protocols hospitals have, you're not allowed to manage your own diabetes. The nursing staff has to do that for you. So like it was very like, I don't even know the word for it, like having like no more autonomy over like how you manage your body, because now it's given to someone else. And like, eating, for example, was already a struggle. And then before every meal, I had to go and find 2 nurses who could like double sign that I was allowed to give myself insulin for the food I was about to eat. Like it was just like such a nightmare. And now like I've definitely found that having a bit more of a relaxed approach around food, not being so like, not just seeing it so black and white. And I really used to associate like any higher levels, especially like if my blood sugar maybe spiked a little bit or went a bit higher than I wanted it to go, I would straight away blame myself and blame the food. So like, must have been the meal, I ate too much, I am greedy, I am a failure, whatever, like these types of thinking. And that just led to so much stress, so much like self-hatred. And I've, realized over time that it's not actually the food to blame. It's not me to blame. It's just the situation. And sometimes I might make a mistake, or sometimes I might bolus wrong for something, but that's part of it. And that's a mistake I can learn from and hopefully do a little bit better next time, rather than beating myself up about it, which doesn't help the situation, doesn't help me.
Yeah, the mental connection with how your body handles nutrition is a very real thing. And I remember a couple of years ago on my other podcast, I actually got a gut hypnotist on. And I remember listening to him talk and kind of, maybe it's just because I was younger, I was a bit more naive, maybe not as open-minded, and just kind of being like, I don't know how much I'm buying into that. And then as I expanded my work and obviously opened my mind a bit more and saw this in action and started to realize your mental health and the way your mind thinks about food has such a profound impact on what happens in your body. Like that gut brain connection is such a real thing, but same with everything. I'm pretty sure I read a study the other day. Don't quote me. This is terrible science because I can't quote this study, but it was talking about if people had different foods and they believed if they were good or bad foods, what the response was in their body. And it does. It has a powerful, powerful impact.
Yeah, well, it is huge. Like we all probably have heard of those studies where people are given like a muffin with gluten and a muffin without gluten, but they're all told it has gluten in it. And even the people with the gluten-free muffin, but told it's got gluten in it, they report symptoms, and they actually reported more symptoms than the one who actually had the gluten-containing muffin. So like, it's interesting just how much of an impact, just believing something is going to affect you in a certain way makes you experience, some of those symptoms, even when maybe you wouldn't have if you hadn't believed that. And that's a huge thing with like digestion is a massive one. So if you think, eating this is going to make me feel rubbish, it's going to make me bloated, it's going to whatever, like chances are you'll probably experience some of that just because you've convinced yourself that you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a good segue, and I want to come back to athletes and your own experience with figuring out your dosing protocol around exercise, because I imagine that's a stressful event enough in itself, right? Like going to a workout and knowing, hey, have I got this right? What is it like? What are the key things that you need to be aware of when you're trying to get your insulin right around working out?
Look, it's a bit of a trial and error game, especially because exercise affects your blood sugars differently depending on, number one, the type of exercise. So is it something that is more like aerobic, so like a lower intensity sort of cardio, maybe like going for a run or going for a long walk or a bike ride? Or is it more like a higher intensity anaerobic type of exercise like HIIT or F45, CrossFit, that type of thing? So that definitely has an impact. So higher intensity training, even weightlifting, it generally increases blood sugar levels because of the adrenaline and cortisol released, or just keeps them the same, versus like that aerobic exercise generally decreases blood sugar levels. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, as well as the duration of exercise, the time of the day. So I find if I am exercising in the morning, the exercise has a much less effect on my blood sugar levels than if I'm exercising at the end of the day. And I think that's just because I've been active the whole day, walking around and doing stuff and having insulin on board, eating whatever. And then also the food and the insulin that you have had on board, like eaten before. So have you had a meal? Have you had insulin for that meal? Have you, eaten a certain amount of carbs, whatever? Like these are all things that you have to consider. So as a diabetic, like the thing that I'm the biggest fan of is just routine. So trying to like do similar things, not exactly the same, but similar things most days, especially around training, because if you throw, extra variables into there, it's going to be much harder. It's always much harder. So like trying to stick to a same routine with training is really helpful. It's hard with CrossFit because you always...
I was going to say, how does that work with CrossFit? Don't you guys rock up everything and it's like a new workout?
But like, I feel like I'm totally winging it all the time. And sometimes I get it completely wrong and I have a hypo or I have a massive spike, and that's okay. Like that's part of it. Just part of it. But I do my best. And, things like, looking at your blood sugar levels coming into the exercise. So we usually have like an aim of where we like blood sugars to sit to prevent going low during that exercise. And then for me, the biggest thing is not having too much insulin on board whilst I'm exercising. So if let's say I have a pre-workout snack before I go to my, 6:30 p.m. training session, and I decide to have, say I wanted to have a hot cross bun before that would be pretty tricky if I needed to give myself insulin for that, because I might be sitting good before I go into the session, but then when I start moving, that insulin suddenly is way more effective and my blood sugar just takes a crash. So I just need to consider things like that. So for example, if I'm having a pre-training snack and I know I'll be exercising afterwards, I'll have to reduce the bolus amount quite significantly. Also, I might have to reduce my basal rate like before and during the exercise, also after the exercise to prevent hypos during the night. But like this all sounds quite confusing, but if you're diabetic, it's really just about kind of getting to know your body and how those different things affect your own blood sugar levels, because it is going to be a little bit different for each person. And even like doing the same thing on different days is going to be a little bit different. So yeah, trial and error, writing things down, changing one thing at a time, and just trying to find what works best.
This is a good point, I think, is worth highlighting as well. And you're talking about getting your pre-training snacks in. And again, if we're talking about like popular science and what people see on social media, carbs get demonized a lot. And you would see it all the time, especially in the CrossFit world. Like carbs get demonized, even though they're the main fuel source for most activity, unless you are doing, say, like longer, lower endurance activity. And coming from someone who does a lot of endurance activity, if you're running up a hill, you need carbs. And if you're on like a trail, or if you live in most cities, you're going to have to use carbs sometime. So even for those type of workouts, carbs are really important. Has having type 1 diabetes, has that made that much more obvious to you, how important these things are for fueling the exercise properly?
What I can just say is when I have a low blood sugar, so that means that my muscles aren't getting the glucose that they need. Like I cannot perform. Like I can barely walk, let alone like do any sort of training. Like if I have a hypo during a workout, I am just a zombie mess. Like I literally cannot do anything. So that definitely shows you like how important a good supply of carbohydrates to your muscles are for performance. Like obviously that's an extreme level, and somebody who doesn't have diabetes won't have hypos like that. But I think it's good to like just show how important they are for our bodies to function properly. And it's really funny because people always use, like the low carb people always use sort of the phrase protein's essential and fat's essential, but carbs aren't essential. So that just shows that we don't need them. But I'm actually more of the philosophy that if our body can make carbohydrates from other things, that shows how important they are, because if they, aren't getting enough, our body have this backup plan where they can create them from other macronutrients and other compounds in our body to make sure that we are getting enough of them. I don't know if that's completely weird, but that's just my philosophy on that.
I mean, the body's a pretty complex thing, but it's very smart, right? Like we don't have a lot of things that are unnecessary. It just doesn't make sense in evolutionary biology, right? So if it's there and we can process them and we have an entire, energetic system specific to that, it would make sense that, yeah, they're probably important in specific circumstances, right?
Yeah. And look, just because they're not essential doesn't mean that they're not, like they don't help and like make things optimal. So yeah, they might not be essential for survival, but do we want to just survive, or do we want to thrive and do our best and perform our best? And if that's the goal, like we know from eating, if you were eating very low carb and just trying to live off, fats and protein, your body actually can't convert those nutrients into energy fast enough to maintain those really high intensities. You'd probably be fine, going for walks and going for runs and doing long distance sort of stuff if your body's adapted to using those as a fuel source. But the moment you want to do higher intensity stuff, are you going to be able to reach those same levels without the carbohydrates on board? And the science suggests no, probably not.
Have you had many clients come through, Nina, that say, even if they are type 1 diabetic or even not, and they want to follow, say, things that are low carb, say the carnivore diet or a primal diet or a ketogenic or Atkins or whatever it is, do you find that a lot? No,
I actually honestly have never had clients who have wanted to. I've definitely had clients who are under eating carbs and who have kind of a fear around carbs. And it's often quite active people. Or like, feeling like they can't eat carbs more than once a day. So like, say if they have them at lunch, they can't have them again at dinner, and like rules around carbs and amounts and foods and things like that for sure. But luckily I've never had anyone who wants to follow a carnivore or anything crazy like that.
Yeah, very lucky, because it, again, I don't know, we don't need to go into the semantics of it, but I do want to touch on your own diet, Nina, and you do follow a plant-based diet. What made you go for that?
Yeah, so I think because I'm a nutritionist and because of my history and everything, most people assume it was a health related decision, but it actually completely wasn't. It was a completely ethical decision. So when I was 6 years old, I mean, not six, in grade 6, I decided I want to go vegetarian because I just, kind of made that connection, this meat is animals and I don't want to eat animals. And I decided that was that. So I was vegetarian, since about grade 6. And then it was about 7 or 8 years ago when I decided to make the change to go fully plant-based and exclude all animal products, which again, it was an ethical decision at the time. I just decided I don't really align with, these food industries. And if I can eat only plants and still be my healthiest and live a really healthy life and get everything that I need, then I'm going to give that a crack. So I haven't really looked back since then, although I definitely admit I have followed very one-sided ways of eating plant-based in the beginning. And that was heavily influenced by social media. There was a big thing around, super high carb, super low fat, basically excluding all fats and, eating giant banana smoothie bowls and things like that. You've probably come across that before. But so it definitely wasn't the healthiest at some stages during that time. But as I've learned more about nutrition and how to really optimize a plant-based diet, especially for performance goals as well, and, supporting recovery and supporting training and muscle building and all of that, I've just found plant-based diet is what aligns with my own values the most, and also what I enjoy eating and what makes me feel good. So I've just kind of stuck with it.
And obviously, like you just said, you've made it work for you, right? Like you've made the plant-based diet and you can obviously fuel your training. You can meet the needs that you're controlling, your type 1 diabetes, and you can obviously meet all of your needs. Was that quite a process going through that? Like you said, you had a lot of the influence from social media. Was it a long and tedious process to get to that point?
Yeah, definitely. And because I have a long history of severely under eating, and anyone who eats plant-based knows plant-based foods also tend to be a lot more filling because of the fiber, and they are quite voluminous. Just getting around eating enough, I'd say, was probably, and even now still is, one of my biggest hurdles. Now it's not mentally, but physically, just getting all the food down that I need to get down for my training can be a challenge sometimes. But yeah, I've definitely sort of learnt how to eat best for me and what I want to achieve on a plant-based diet. And I'm always sort of tweaking things with trying different meals and timing of meals and things like that. And also just what I feel like eating changes over time. But yeah, it's just what I definitely feel like aligns with my values and what I want to do the most.
Do you feel like, in terms of, say, a plant-based diet, we've said this a couple of times throughout this podcast, there are probably core principles. They're core principles that we know work, and you can mix and match that and probably make them fit. Well, you can. It's not probably. You can make them fit for any diet. Do you think there is a lot of misconception when it goes out there of, this diet is best for me? Or in the performance world, you would see it all the time with CrossFit, where it's this diet is way better for performance. Do you ever find that you get a lot of resistance from people if they say, hey, if you're eating a plant-based performance, it's not good for your performance, or it is good? Or how do you find people respond to that?
Definitely. I think still the biggest misconception around plant-based is that you can't get enough protein, which is just the age-old myth, which just isn't true. It might be a bit harder, but it's more just harder if you're used to getting most of your protein from animal-based sources, and you just kind of have to relearn how to structure your meals and what foods to choose to make sure you are getting the protein that you need, and not just excluding those animal products and replacing it with broccoli and mushrooms and stuff like that. So yeah, it's just about kind of knowing what to eat. And yeah, I think that with performance nutrition, it really usually just comes down to number one, actually eating enough to fuel your performance, getting enough of all the macronutrients that you need, the proteins and the carbohydrate, especially for performance and recovery. And then the one that I think most people often forget about, except for actual, sports dietitians, but the general public, they're so focused on the macronutrients that they forget about how important micronutrients are for our performance and for our recovery. And I think because a plant-based diet heavily focuses on those whole foods and those micronutrient, antioxidant rich fruit, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, because you're getting more of those micronutrients in. I think that's one of the biggest reasons people often see, like benefits in recovery and energy levels, because they're just eating more of those micronutrient rich foods. And that can totally be done, on a plant-based diet with lots of plants but still some animal products, or a fully plant exclusive diet. But it's more about, okay, what foods are you including, rather than this like strict diet or rules that you're following.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing, right? Especially with athletes who are always, say, looking for that edge or looking for that performance, is they want the 1% so they can get that little bit better.
And the supplements.
Exactly. I've noticed with our guys, we word it now, because a lot of our guys, I would say, we eat plant-based diets with animal products, but it is for the micronutrient spread, right? And I think people don't appreciate, if you eat, just focus on one food group, that yeah, you might be hitting your protein, you might be getting your fat, and yeah, you're getting the recommended carbs, but you might not be getting these micronutrients. And they're the things that matter. Like, they're the things that are in the reactions making our energy. They're the things that are recovering your muscles. They're making everything happen. So when you go on these more plant-based diets, is plant-based more superior? Who knows? Who cares? You're just getting everything that we know that your body needs, right?
Agree. Yeah. And especially on social media these days, I see like the term like macro friendly thrown around all the time. And then you see these people, posting their macro friendly breakfast, which is like wheat bix with Biscoff and protein powder and maple syrup. And it's macro friendly. It's like, okay, yeah, but where's your fruit and vegetables? Like, can we at least put some berries in there and, like get some calcium rich fortified milk or dairy or whatever you want, like actually make it a healthier meal, not just the macronutrients.
Yeah, I find it's at either end of the extremes, right?
I agree. And I work with that like a lot as well, like people who've taken the whole foods to the extreme, where they're just trying to eat fruit and vegetables. And it's almost like, especially if you're an active person, it's going to have some more processed foods in there as well, because otherwise it's virtually just impossible to meet your energy requirements without severe digestive discomfort if you're just eating, fruit and vegetables and whole food. So it really is always comes back to that balance for the individual.
Yeah, I always say to our athletes, it's a really nice feeling. Like when you have a high training load, like at the moment, say, like I'm going through a training load where I'm training 25 to 30 plus hours a week, and you need to be on top of it. Like, it's a nice feeling when you're on top of your nutrition and you're hitting the right macros and you're getting all those good micronutrients. But when you have such a high training load and that volume and stress on your body, you do feel it. You do feel it if you're just eating steak every single day and you're not getting all the nutrients, because you feel your recovery slow down. You get to the end of the week and you go, man, I really feel like a bag of crap. Like, I really feel terrible. And I think a lot of athletes, they struggle to make that connection, and they're just like, oh no, you know what? Yes, there is a normal fatigue, but there is also things that are outside that level of normal. You shouldn't be feeling beat down every single time, especially if you're getting that correct training adaptation. A lot of time it just comes down to that. They don't have the good micronutrient spread. They're scared of all the processed foods. They won't put in enough calories. They won't load up on carbs. And then just over time, it's instead of just building their body up like athletes should, they're just breaking it down.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny. Like, I'd say 90% of clients that I speak with, they're doing some sort of like CrossFit or triathlon training or whatever exercise first thing in the morning. So it might be like 5:30 a.m., 6 a.m. And they're all like, I don't want to eat before. Like, it's too early. I'm just not hungry. I don't feel like it. I'm fine. I don't need it. And they're like, please just give me 2 weeks, start having a banana before training, come back to me and tell me if you feel any different. And I haven't had a single person who has come back and hasn't said, I actually feel better. I actually really enjoy my pre-training snack now, and I feel so much better in training for it. I'm hitting, better numbers, or I'm hitting PBs, or I'm recovering faster, or whatever. Like, everyone sees the benefits, even though, the first thing is always like, no, I don't need that. It's not important.
Yeah, athletes have a real less is more mindset for everything. And we can get into the whole.
Except for with training, then it's always more is more.
Yeah, exactly right. But Nina, the last thing I want to ask you, because we are hitting our time here, very last question. We've gone over a lot of topics. nutrition is, like I keep saying, it can be very complex, but it can also be very simple if you know where to look and you know the right people to follow. So what would be your advice for someone who's trying to navigate all of the information that exists in the nutrition world? What would be your advice? Where do they look to get good info? What do they do? How do they go about it?
So if you're looking on social media, definitely looking at someone's credentials, who are they? What have they done? Like, are they a registered sports dietitian or a registered nutritionist, or are they just, some health coach or someone who has lost weight in the past or whatever? So definitely looking at someone's credentials. But even that, I'm a nutritionist. Nutritionist isn't a regulated term, which I find very, very frustrating. But, it is what it is. I think other things that you can look for is if they are actually saying things which align with what other professionals in that space are saying, or is it something that is completely different and new? Because that is a red flag. If someone is saying things that no one else is saying, then it's, pretty certain that it's probably not exactly evidence-based, because evidence-based is what it says. It's what the majority of evidence is saying and shows us. It's not just what some random my study has shown to back up this claim that they've made. So that's definitely some big things to look out for. But then I always encourage people to also ask themselves about context and whether this actually is relevant to them in their situation, because there's definitely things which are evidence-based and 100% true, but they're just not relevant to certain people. So, for example, we could say intermittent fasting. That might be a great intervention for certain people in certain situations, but for an athlete, a CrossFit person, someone recovering from an eating disorder, a whole heap of people, that is something completely irrelevant and probably unhelpful, maybe even harmful. So it's always about looking, okay, is this information actually relevant to me? Is it going to be helpful for me? And if it's not, then kindly scroll past and disregard.
Yeah, all excellent points. I always think that, yes, scientific breakthroughs do happen. And when big scientific breakthroughs happen, they can seem a bit weird, like penicillin. If you think of that, would have been very weird at the time. But the silver lining to all that is if a big scientific breakthrough does happen, I can almost guarantee you're not going to read about it on Instagram. There's going to be far better sources where you're going to find that happening. But Nina, that's a great episode. We covered so much. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know we're running a little bit over, but if people listen to this and they go, holy smokes, I need to work with Nina, I need to chat to her, I've got more questions that I want to ask her, I want to book in for a consultation, how can people get in contact with you?
Great. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a great conversation. So people can find me over on Instagram. So my handle is at naturally_Nina_, or you can also head to my website, which is just www.naturally-nina.com. And you can find information about consults and booking in there, as well as lots of recipes and things like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Nina. I'm sure I'm going to get 100 questions after this. I might have to get you back on and we'll do a live Q&A to go through them.
Would love that.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks.
And there it is, another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. What an informative episode. Hopefully now you understand the intricacies of type 1 diabetes a little more, but more importantly, you can appreciate how nutrition can be both extremely complex and very simple, and it is all about finding what works best for you. I highly encourage you to follow Nina on her socials so you can stay up to date with everything she is up to. This podcast will be available through the podcast app, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and if you follow along with our socials at _fight dietitian, you can see all of the best bits from our podcast episodes. Thanks for listening in, and I'll see you guys for the next episode of the TFD Performance Podcast.